Welcome back to Legacy Contracts. And if this is your first time here, we're glad you found us. This channel exists for attorneys who sense that something beneath the surface of their firm isn't quite working, even if it's hard to name. Here, we look beyond surface-level efficiency and into the invisible systems shaping how your firm operates, serves clients, and sustains growth. Through practical insight and honest conversation, we help bring clarity to what's often overlooked, so you can lead with intention, not assumption. If you're interested in building a law firm that's not just functional but thoughtfully designed, you're in the right place. Let's begin. If you've been running a law firm and something has felt off, but you haven't been able to clearly explain what it is, this is probably going to feel familiar. Not broken, not failing, just heavier than it should be. Work gets done, clients are served, the firm is moving, but underneath that there's friction. Things take longer than expected. Decisions don't move as cleanly as they should. Certain people carry more than they're supposed to, and it's difficult to point to one single issue and say, that's the problem. Over the last 5 months, we've been focused on one thing: naming what law firms are carrying that hasn't been clearly defined. And what we've consistently seen is this: once something becomes visible, it stops being theoretical. It becomes something you have to decide what to do with. Let's walk through what that actually looks like, because this progression is where most firms start to recognize themselves. January is where it begins, and the idea is simple: you can't fix what you don't see. Most firms are not lacking effort. They're not underperforming because people aren't working hard enough. They're operating inside systems that were never fully built. And that shows up in very specific ways: workflows that exist, but only in someone's head; responsibilities that shift depending on who's available; decisions that get made, but never clearly assigned. On the surface, everything still works. Nothing breaks immediately. But over time, things start to feel heavier, because instead of being supported by structure, the firm is being carried by people, and people can only carry so much. February was when we discussed how things start to come into focus, because once something becomes visible, the instinct is to fix it. You notice the inconsistency, you see the gaps, and naturally you want to correct them. But this is where most firms run into a problem, because visibility without understanding leads to temporary fixes. You address what you see, but not what's causing it. So the issue comes back. Let's take a couple of simple examples. If intake is inconsistent, it's easy to think it's a communication issue. If billing is delayed, it's easy to think it's a timing issue. But those are surface-level explanations. What's actually happening is structural. Intake inconsistency might come from unclear ownership, missing steps, or no defined standard. Billing delays might come from workflow gaps, lack of checkpoints, or undefined responsibility. These aren't isolated issues. They're outcomes of how the system is designed. And until that structure is clear, the problem doesn't go away. It just shows up again in a slightly different form. March was where most firms try to act. This is where solutions start getting layered in. New processes get introduced. Oversight increases. There's more focus on accountability, and again, that makes sense. If something isn't working, add more control. But without a clear structure underneath, this creates more friction. Now there are more steps, more expectations, more moving parts. But not necessarily more clarity. So the firm ends up doing more, but not operating better. And this is usually when leadership starts to feel the weight, because they're the ones bridging the gaps. They're answering the questions. They're making the decisions that no one else has clear ownership over. And slowly, everything starts routing back to them. April was where the shift happens. This is where accountability gets redefined. Because up until this point, accountability often gets tied to effort. People need to communicate better. They need to be more proactive. They need to take more ownership. But when you look closer, the issue usually isn't effort, it's design. When ownership isn't clearly defined, Work slows down because no one is fully responsible. Decisions escalate because no one is clearly authorized, and leadership gets pulled into everything. Not because the team isn't capable, but because the system doesn't support them. This is the part most people don't expect, because once you name these patterns, you can't unsee them. The workflow that only works because one person holds it together. The decisions that always come back to you. The delays that feel normal but shouldn't be. They become obvious. And once they're obvious, they become difficult to ignore. And that's where pressure shows up. Not external pressure, structural pressure. Because now the question isn't, is something off? Now it's, what needs to change? And that's a different conversation. Because change at this level isn't small, it affects roles, ownership, expectations, and how the firm actually operates day to day. This is operational redesign. And this is where most firms pause, not because they don't see the problem, but because seeing it means deciding what to do about it. And that decision carries weight, because it requires clarity, it requires definition, and it requires a shift from how things have been working to how they need to work moving forward. If the last few months have made something clearer inside your firm, if something has started to feel more defined, that's not the end of the process. It's the beginning. Visibility is the first step, but structure is what makes change stick. And without structure, even the clearest insights don't translate into lasting improvement. So the next step is simple. Take what you're starting to see and make it concrete. Define where decisions are routing incorrectly. Identify where ownership is unclear. Understand what needs to be structured so the firm can operate without constant intervention. That's exactly what the firm assessment is designed to do. It's a focused 90-minute diagnostic that looks at how your firm is actually operating, not how it's supposed to operate. And it gives you a clear picture of where the gaps are, what they're costing, and what needs to be defined to change that. If you want to see exactly where that needs to happen inside your firm, you can start there. You'll find the link in the description. And if this conversation felt familiar, if you recognized parts of your firm in this, that's usually a sign it's time to look at it directly. We hope today's insight helped bring clarity to something that may have been operating quietly in the background of your firm. Progress doesn't always start with doing more. It often starts with seeing more clearly. Law firms aren't built overnight. They're shaped by the decisions you make once the invisible becomes visible. This is Legacy Contracts, and until next time, keep leading with clarity.